Thanks, Speaker. And I want to acknowledge all the previous speakers and the member for Clark. Whistleblowers have shown incredible courage, and it's right that we put into place legislation that provides effective frameworks to protect them. As others have noted, whistleblowers play an incredibly important role in exposing wrongdoing and, in doing so, protect the very fabric of our democracy. They protect integrity and the rule of law that members in this place like to talk about, but without a commitment, an honest commitment to effective integrity infrastructure in our Commonwealth, that rule of law is always under threat. Australia's public interest disclosure law was introduced when we on this side were last in government in 2015, and it was designed to protect whistleblowers against reprisals by senior officials and to promote integrity in the public service. And the current Attorney-General was the Attorney-General at that time and introduced it, and he was conscious that it was going to need to be looked at in the future to assess whether or not it was working in the national interest. And that's why he wrote a statutory review into the Act at that time. We recognised that a review was necessary to address some of the complexities of that law, but on us losing government in 2013, a statutory review never took place. Under the Abbott government, the Act fell into neglect. Under the Morrison government, the Philip Moss review took place 5 years later. Protecting whistleblowing wasn't a big priority for those opposite. The Coalition did agree in principle to 30 of that review's 33 recommendations, but in principle, being the operative words, many would remember that we saw high-profile raids on journalists and other cases of excessive secrecy and secret ministers under the former federal government, under those opposite. And I quote, "It was shameful that the government took some 4 years to respond to Philip Moss's report," end quote, is what the current Attorney-General, Mark Dreyfus, said before the election, and he announced the following commitment in 2021, and I quote, "We intend in government to act on Philip Moss's recommendations for necessary improvements to the public interest disclosure scheme," end quote. So fast forward a year, and that is exactly what our government is doing. We are committed to ensuring that Australia has more effective protection for whistleblowers. And that's why the Attorney-General announced last week that he would introduce a bill into the Parliament before the end of this year, so in this sitting block, however long that may be, which will make priority amendments to the Public Interest Disclosure Act. And this Act is an important element of the Commonwealth's integrity and transparency framework. It enables public officials to disclose suspected wrongdoing by another public official or by an Australian government agency. Now, suspected wrongdoing is defined broadly and includes fraud, serious misconduct and corrupt conduct, as well as minor wrongdoing. Public officials who make such disclosures have protections from immunities from liability. Reforms to the PID Act are long overdue, and action is essential to ensure that whistleblowers are supported to come forward with disclosures of public sector wrongdoing and corruption. Now, the government staged reforms of the PID Act will include the introduction of a bill to Parliament before the end of this year, as I just mentioned, and the progression of broader reforms next year to address the underlying complexity of the scheme and to provide effective and accessible protections to public sector whistleblowers. These amendments deliver on the government's election commitment to implement key recommendations of the 2016 review of the Public Interest Disclosure Act by Philip Moss and other parliamentary committee reports. Our government has committed to it, and we will get it done. Thanks, Mr Speaker.